All right, everyone, welcome back to the Proof of Concept. This is the 4th episode of Season 1. I am Jared Derival, and this is my Proof of Concept. The topic today will be our application ID as well as content ID and how to disrupt zero-day vulnerability. Well, if you're an executive, this segment of the Proof of Concept is for you. It is called Executive Brief. This is where we brief executives on latest trends, latest designs, and how to position your IT and cybersecurity operation for success. I can't imagine an IT environment today that doesn't have next generation firewalls. And if you are planning to move towards a zero trust network architecture, the first place for you to focus your attention is in your next generation firewalls. Why is that true? That is because your next generation firewalls play multiple roles. So you used to have switches, routers, and firewalls. 3 different types of network equipment in your network environment. Today, you have your next generation firewalls that play all 3 of these roles. That's not to say that they replace the switches. You will always need to have switches. That's where you connect your laptops. This laptop that I'm using here to stream this live podcast, I am connected, or this laptop is connected to a switch. Your next generation firewalls would be too expensive if they were to replace your access layer. That is the layer where the endpoints connect to the network. Now, this access layer is not just made of switches. It is also made of other layer 2 devices such as access points. So you most likely will have Wi-Fi in your environment, and you will have wired connectivity to your network as well. Next generation firewalls will not replace that. But what I mean by that they combined switching, routing, and firewall capabilities in one appliance, which is called now the next generation firewalls. And that's just the basic, should I say. Unless you have firewalls that can do that, you do not have firewalls that can protect you against emerging threats. Why is that true? That is because a device that could protect you against threats that existed yesterday will not be able to protect you against threats that will exist tomorrow. So next generation firewalls evolve with your institution. They evolve against evolving threats. Your next generation firewalls can be deployed as layer 2 devices. They can also be deployed as layer 3 devices. The ability to decide whether you're deploying them as layer 2 devices or as layer 3 devices, or a combination of both of these. Layer 2 would mean that they're involved in the switching topology. Layer 3 means they're involved in the routing. The best practice is to deploy them as layer 3 devices. That means they are performing your routing functions. Routing to any kind of other places, such as from the LAN to the WAN, between branches, through a private WAN that you may have, that also is handled by the next generation firewalls. But more importantly, they identify users on the network, identify content that's traversing your network, and they identify the applications that traverse the network. What do we mean by applications in this context? We're talking about network application. A network application here can mean all kinds of things. If your end users rely on Amazon, for instance, for them to perform their work, well, there will be applications that identify the Amazon service that they're using. If they rely on web browsing, there'll be applications that identify that. But why is it important for you to be able to identify the applications that transact on your network? That is because you're going to give role-based access. Users on your network will no longer have access to everything on your network or outside of your network. Being able to identify the applications, whether they are hosted on-premise, hosted in the cloud, whether they are SaaS applications, is a good thing for you to be able to give them access to only these applications that they need and not to other applications that they don't need. For you to do that, it is important for you to be able to identify who are the people who need access to these applications. And these applications can be applications that are hosted on-premise, like inside of your data center, or applications that are hosted in the cloud, or applications that you have no control over. Think about something like QuickBooks. Now, the people who work in HR and accounting, they may need access to QuickBooks, but someone who works in another department, such as legal, may not need access to QuickBooks. So, because you can now identify the users using your next generation firewall, And you can also identify the application, such as QuickBooks. You can now say, okay, if you're part of the group of users that work for accounting, we will give you access to QuickBooks. But if you are not part of this group, no access to QuickBooks for you. That's just one example. And that is key because your next generation firewall now is at the intersection. What intersection is that? This intersection should be called the microperimeters. The microperimeters, they move around, or they are positioned around the DAS. What is the DAS? That's data, asset, access, and services. It is the most important because without this, your business cannot operate. That means your end users cannot work, your customers cannot consume services from you, and ultimately, you're not generating revenue. So if your DAS gets affected, your business is disrupted. So you want to protect the DAS. And the first exercise that you performed was to identify the DAS, to know what is the most important asset that you're trying to defend against cyber threats. And now that you have identified the DAS, you know where the DAS lives. But whatever the DAS happens to mean for your institution, you need to know what is inside of it. Now that you know that, you put the microperimeters around it. Why are there microperimeters? Why not just perimeters? That is because they can have multiple different sizes, and quite likely it will be made of a bunch of small pieces, small concepts that come together to achieve one big purpose of defending your most valuable cyber asset against cyber threats. And so this microperimeter needs to be built primarily with next generation firewalls. And so your next generation firewall now is at the intersection of your users, your asset, access, and services. And as a result of this position of your next generation firewall, it can not only identify the users, it can also identify the data, asset, access, and services that they need, and make the decision for you based on how you configure it to allow users to access the data, asset, access, and services, or the DAS that they need to have access to. So, content ID, application ID, these are key concepts. You need to understand the content that the users need to access, and this content will live inside of the DAS. More than 60% of the data that we use in the institutions today lives in the cloud. So when you buy the cloud service from a Microsoft, Amazon, or Google, etc., they tell you where the data is likely to live. But even if you don't buy cloud services, you build your own data center for you to host your data. Well, as you know, it will be in your interest to have motion of this data. And VMware has this technology that's called vMotion that allows your servers to move, right, in different places. How do you do that? How do you get your next generation firewalls to move around as your data moves around? Think about if your data moves around the world. Think about if your data moves around different servers, right? For us in Florida, we are likely to have hurricanes once in a while or very often. So if you have a physical data center, you have part of the physical data center here in Florida where your employees that are local can quickly get access to it. And you'll have part of it in some other places that likely will not have hurricanes. So when there's a hurricane here, your data or your services are not affected because your data moves between Florida and wherever else that you have your data centers. Primarily, if the microperimeter will follow the data where data moves. If your data lives in the cloud, like in Azure, for instance, you will have your next generation firewalls in Azure as well. There is an architecture a while back that Palo Alto created that's called the Transit VNet architecture that was made specifically for Azure firewall implementation. So when you have your Azure tenant, you have your resources, your resource groups, et cetera, inside of your Azure tenant. Well, you would have a VNet in a resource group to host just your Palo Alto or your other next generation firewalls that you have happen to be. It's a VNet just like all the other VNets that you have, except it's a VNet in a resource group that hosts your security appliances, your virtual security appliances. And these things are architected in the best possible way so that traffic does not enter or leave your protect surface inside of your Azure tenant or your AWS or your Google Cloud or whatever cloud you happen to be in, or all of those clouds that you happen to be in a hybrid environment. Traffic does not enter or leave these protect zones without going through your next generation firewalls that will make decisions to identify the users, to know the DAS or data asset access and services, and determine based on how they're architected who should have access to what, when, how, etc., etc. How do you do this identification of users? We saw that in the last episode. How do you achieve the identification of the content that will be part of the DAS? The content can mean the data. Data can here mean bunch of social security numbers, can mean bunch of license splits, can mean bunch of people's names, health record, etc., voting records, all kinds of stuff like that. What banking records, right? Whatever the data happens to be for you, how do you achieve that? Well, it is simple. Well, I don't know if it's simple, but it is very achievable with next generation firewalls. They come with what's called an applipedia. Well, not all of them call it the same way. Every next generation firewall vendor will have some type of proprietary feature that they have. Palo Alto has the App ID proprietary, and they have the applipedia. It's a collection of all of the possible public applications that you can have. And so there'll be a signature that identifies each public application. Think about WhatsApp, Facebook, QuickBook, in Azure, AWS, whatever application that is publicly used. The next generation firewall vendor will have a signature that uniquely identifies this application. Now, what about the content? And what about when you have applications that are not public, like your own homegrown applications that you develop yourself? No problem. You can create custom signatures for them as well to identify the applications that you have developed yourself that the rest of the world doesn't know about. And it is key because you want to give access to only applications that you want to give access to. And these applications typically are called sectioned application. Well, folks, this can be a very deep conversation. Why is it that it is so important for you to identify the applications? In a modern network, it is not enough for you to allow traffic only based on the source address in some ports. That's because the malicious actors will present themselves to look like trusted traffic, and you'll allow them because you can't make the difference between malicious and non-malicious traffic. True security is identify who the users are if they're coming from inside, identify what application that they're using to transact, and then identify the content of the traffic. But to do that, you need to be able to uniquely identify the users, uniquely identify the applications, and accurately identify the content. But what about when you're in the presence of a vulnerability or a threat that no one in the world knows how to defend against? These are called zero-day malware, zero-day vulnerability. Think about if a piece of software, a piece of malware was created this morning. Palo Alto, Cisco, Fortinet, Checkmate, the biggest network security vendors in the world, none of them know how to defend against something that was just developed or that was just published last hour. But there is a way for your next generation firewall to take a sample of this and send it to a lab where it gets analyzed and then the verdict gets rendered on it. And what I mean by that is there is a cloud sandbox now that next generation firewalls come with. But what about the environments where we can't take sample of data or any data at all and forward to the cloud? No problem. What will happen in these environments is that you will have the sandbox inside of the environment. In the case of Palo Alto, it's called wildfire. Well, folks, I think that's enough. The next segment, I will speak to technical resources, the engineers, architects, administrators who will implement these things and how to defend against zero-day malware. You want to identify the users, right? You've got to have a user database. Most people have Active Directory, but it's not just Active Directory. You can have a cloud identity provider as well, such as Azure Active Directory or Microsoft Entra. Now that you have identified those users who are on your network, you need to now implement application ID. That means make sure that your firewall rules are application aware. And how do you achieve that? Watch this here. Let's say I'm creating a rule here that's going to allow, all I did in this Palo Alto firewall, I click on policy. You see those very important tabs that you have up on top? And I click on add. This is where you have all of your policies, right? Once I click add, I'm going to add a new policy on my Palo Alto firewall. Let's call this allow Jared to some application, let's say Facebook. Okay, now this rule is universal. That means it can be used for source and for rules where the source and the destination zones are different or similar. But it could have also been intra-zone. That means intra-zone. That means going from this zone into the same zone, or inter-zone at least two different zones. Okay, I create my rule here, give it a name, give the rule a type, put a description, allow Jared to reach Facebook. And that would be all I need for now. The source, there must be a source, right? A zone where the traffic's coming from. The user likely will come from some zone. Let's say they're coming from the zone inside. They're going to some zone. Facebook is not on premise, it's not inside. It's likely going to be outside. There needs to be a zone for the outside. But more importantly, not only do you choose the zone, but you can now choose the user. You could choose the address as well. Imagine that my address is 10.0.0.0/24. I could specify the source address. That's the specific subnet where the traffic's coming from. Now, assuming that you have a good network segmentation or micro-segmentation plan, now you should be able to have that. Now, you need to identify the users as well. That means your rules are created specifically for user groups. Now, I'm going to add a user here, right? I can add my user account. Let's hypothetically say this is called Jared at acme.com. Okay, so only this user account would be able to match this rule. But I could also have taken a user group such as this or that or other groups, etc. Now we need to focus on where the traffic's going. The destination will be any because it's going to any IP on the internet. But the application will not be any. I'm going to choose Facebook as my application. Because I choose Facebook here, all of the Facebook applications will be allowed. Look at the Facebook applications. Facebook chat, Facebook code, Facebook download, Facebook game, Facebook posting, etc., etc. Facebook voice, Facebook video, etc., right? Facebook mail. But I may not have chosen to allow all Facebook or the entire Facebook, right? I could have chosen to allow only Facebook chat. So I could choose just Facebook chat. And this user would now just be able to chat on Facebook and not do anything else. This app, Facebook chat, has dependency. It has those two apps that it depends on. So for Facebook chat to function, you must allow those two as well. So it adds dependencies for you automatically. Now, applications will also have protocols. Protocols are ports that the application uses to operate. The best practice here is to use the application default. So we'll keep it on application default, but you could have very easily created a protocol, and not really create a protocol, but ultimately add the specific port. Let's say 443, right? If it's not already here, SSL, HTTP. You see, HTTP, HTTPS, they're already here. In these, inside of these, you have the port HTTPS, you have 443, and HTTP, you have 80. But if you didn't have that, you could have easily created one here that you call HTTPSX, for instance, right? Oops, you would need to click on add here. Add new service, HTTPSX, just an example. Whether this is TCP or UDP, input the port 443 or whatever you want. But HTTPS already has this, or port 443 is already identified here as HTTPS for you. You just select that. But when it doesn't exist, you can add it yourself. And now the action, very important. Are you allowing that or denying? If you want to allow, you choose allow. If you want to deny, you choose deny. And plenty of other actions that you can take against that or for that. Now you want to log your traffic, log it at the end of the session. That creates less logs and consumes less space. You can forward that to log collecting server if you have that. Schedule, you rarely do that, but if you want to have this rule in operation for a specific period of time, maybe from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., you can do that as well. But very importantly here, you need to add security profiles to this. Now, the security profiles are really where the granular traffic inspection happens. If you don't put any security profile, you have created a good rule given that you have the source, you have the user, you're aware of the user, you're aware of the application, but not much more than that will be achieved. The security profiles will not just allow or deny the traffic, but they will maintain awareness of the traffic. The traffic may have started as good and then it ends up being bad somewhere along the way. And so the security profiles will maintain that awareness and take actions even if the malicious traffic is detected somewhere halfway through this session. So what are the security profiles that you can add here? Look at this. In the Palo Alto, you have antivirus. You've got to pay for these. These are licenses that give you these capabilities, and I'll show you these licenses as well. You need to put antivirus. The antivirus profiles, Palo Alto sends the firewall with default antivirus profiles here for you. The default is good, but you can create your own as well. Let's take the default antivirus profile. Vulnerability profile. What does this do for you? It protects you against vulnerability. You have two types. You have the default and you have strict. I'm going to show you these vulnerability profiles very soon, but we'll choose the strict for now. Anti-spyware, protects you against spyware. Strict. URL filtering, protects you against bad URLs. So if someone's going to a malicious URL, by default, it will be denied. But you can fine-tune that, right? And deny much more than what is denied in the default, or allow and make certain types of exception. We'll go over these security profiles very quickly. File blocking. File blocking is very important. You need to block downloads of files that are potentially malicious, exe files and other types of files that hackers will download on your devices, install these files, and take control of your devices at some point in the future. Strictly block these. Palo Alto has this profile by default for you that has all of the potentially malicious files that can be downloaded in your environment. I'm not talking here about a file like a Word document or an Excel document. I'm talking about software, pieces of software that malicious actors would install on your devices. Data filtering. There's not a default one that comes with that, but this is where you would be able to filter for specific type of data that you want to allow or deny. Wildfire. This is where you defend yourself against a zero-day vulnerability. That is, vulnerability that just came out right now and that no device knows how to defend against. Well, your Palo Alto firewall will take a sample of this file because it is aware of the content and it will forward it to the Palo Alto Wildfire cloud, right? And from there, Palo Alto will analyze that, and within minutes, they'll render a verdict that will say, this is malware. And if it is malware, they will publish an update to protect your device against that within minutes. That is if you have the Wildfire license. If you don't have the Wildfire license, tomorrow when they publish their new contents, then your firewall will receive it as well, so long as you have the premium license to receive updates. Now, that is dynamic updates. Now, if you don't have any license at all, you will not receive that. And that, my friend, by doing what you did here in all of your rules, and that is, you no longer say the source is any. Some people would say the source is any. The destination is any. If you do that, within minutes you get hacked, because that means even the internet going to anywhere will go through your network. You need to specify the specific source, but more importantly, you need to specify the users that are going to use this rule. And you need to also specify what application that they will use. And extremely importantly, you need to add security profiles. If you were using a FortiGate, here's how you would do that. You would create a new rule. In the FortiGate, you would come to policy and objects here, and firewall policies, create a new firewall policy. And in this new firewall policy here, I would give it a name. Allow Jared to Facebook. and I would put my incoming interface, right? That would be the ingress interface. Let's just say internal 2 example. Outgoing interface. Likely we're going to the WAN. We have 2 exits to the WAN here. Let's say WAN 2. The source in this case here will be the source subnet, right? We could create some subnet just like that. That is the subnet where I will be generating this traffic from. The destination in this case will be any or all in the case of the Fortinet or the FortiGate firewall. Schedule. I'm not going to schedule this. It's going to take it to be in function 24/7. The service now is where we're going to allow specific ports that we want to allow. And in this case, we would be allowing 443 HTTPS because that's web traffic and that's encrypted web traffic. Now, action would be to accept or deny. It doesn't have much more compared to the Palo Alto. And you would want to NAT this. This is how you do it in the Fortinet. You need a NAT in the wool. You can't have a central NAT. Now, you want to add security profiles. You see that? Security profiles, just like in the Palo Alto, where you have these security profiles. Look at these security profiles you have here in the Palo Alto. You have them in the Fortinet as well. Antivirus, enable that. It comes with the default. Web filtering, the same thing as URL filtering. You can see the difference in the name, URL filtering. And this one says web filtering. DNS filter, very important. Application control, very important as well. IPS, intrusion prevention system, very important. That's threat prevention in Palo Alto. File filter, well, we don't have any here. We'll take the default. SSL inspection, no inspection, we'll keep it that way. You can see a slight difference in the technology, right? But ultimately, the same thing is being achieved. What about application ID? Well, Fortinet does not do that like the Palo Alto does, right? But there are ways for you to uniquely identify your applications even with a Fortinet or with a FortiGate. But in the Palo Alto, it's easier. Palo Alto has this that they call the app ID here. And right here, you can choose applications, millions of applications. Let's say I wanted to allow this user to reach, let's say, QuickBooks. I could quickly look for if QuickBooks exists here. QuickBook. Intuit QuickBase. You see that? Intuit QuickBase. That would be the application for the HR people, right? And I would allow that. I promised that I would go over 2 things before we disband for today. The first is the licenses that you need to achieve all of these things that I just mentioned. In the case of the Palo Alto, you would click here and you'll see the licenses that we have. There's a license here. That was a trial license. When this is new, it comes with a software warranty license for 90 days. This can expire. But these others, you shouldn't let them expire. You go without these, you're in big trouble. Advanced threat prevention that protects you against a bunch of things. That's what gives you the entitlement to receive updates. And without updates, this firewall very quickly will become nothing but a brick. It won't be that intelligent. It needs to be connected to the Palo Alto cloud and receive threat intelligence throughout the day. And that's how, that's really what makes this a next generation firewall. It expands and it becomes better and better and better as days go by. You need advanced threat prevention. URL filtering, that's what protects you against bad URLs. Wildfire licenses. You need wildfire licenses. That's how you are able to defend against zero-day vulnerability. DNS security, real big deal. More than 80% of the cyber threats are delivered through DNS attacks. You need to protect against that. SD-WAN, you may not need that. PenDB URL filtering, same thing as the advanced URL filtering, except advanced is more advanced, I would say. Threat prevention and advanced threat prevention, Palo Alto starts to do it that way. And wildfire, you have wildfire here. You have advanced wildfire. So, and that's something new that Palo Alto started to do, to have wildfire and advanced wildfire, threat prevention, advanced threat prevention, URL filtering, advanced URL filtering. But ultimately, you need to have them. You need to have them. You do not have to have them all. If you have a firewall that does not see the web traffic, you don't need URL filtering because that's for web traffic that's going to the web. You don't need wildfire in your data center firewalls that are or your internal firewalls that only see internal traffic. You need to have that as the traffic exits to the WAN. And some of the things that you may not have depending on where your firewall is located, but you must be able to receive updates. threat prevention or advanced threat prevention, you need to have that at the very minimum. Now, what that does for you is that it allows you to receive these things. If you click on dynamic updates here, look at this. We install these every day, scheduled to download and install. That is where we receive antivirus signatures, application and threat, application signature and threat signature. We receive, we download, and we install every day, right? And this we do here. We could do that every hour if we wanted to, right? Download and install. In mission critical environment, you might want to put a threshold to delay the installation, but there's a procedure for that, and we'll get into that in other episodes as we go through the best practices of the next generation firewalls. Antivirus, we want to do that not just daily, but hourly. We want to take the action of download and install as well. We're not mission critical. This is a learning environment where students learn. That is it. Now we commit this. These are the updates that your firewalls will receive from the Palo Alto Cloud. Same thing happens as well for the Fortinet. And the last thing that I need to do is to show the security profiles. The security profiles will be found under objects in the Palo Alto firewall. Security profiles, there it is, right under security profile. You can click on antivirus and you can see the actions that the firewall will take for you, right? Windows executable, it will reset both sides, right? Etc. You can go through these in your own time. Anti-spyware, this is what the firewall will do for you. You have default and you have strict. With the strict, it takes stronger actions, right? A simple critical, it will reset. And simple high spyware, reset both. Whereas the default simple high, it will take the default action. In this default action, you will need to see what that is by opening this here. Simple critical here, the default action, etc. Okay, so that's anti-spyware. Vulnerability protection, you can create your own here. URL filtering, that means bad URLs will be blocked, good URLs will be allowed. Adult content, by default, Palo Alto blocks. Drug abuse, block. But alcohol, it allows. Alcohol and tobacco allows. But command and control center, right? That's definitely malicious websites that are going to hack your devices and control them, block by default. But you can choose more than that. Let's say you didn't like for people to date on your network. You could choose, okay, for dating, I'm going to block that, right? Allow without alert. You don't keep record of this particular URL that the person visited, etc., etc. The possibilities are limitless. Extremism, I think this should be blocked for sure. Blocked. Financial service, allow. Education institution, allow. You can see that, right? Risk, high risk. This should be blocked. High risk should be blocked. Hacking is blocked. In wildfire, for sure. And what does the default say? Application, any file type, any direction, right? If there is content that we're not familiar with, regardless of the application, regardless of the file type, regardless of whether it's coming or leaving, take a sample and forward it to the public Palo Alto cloud for it to be analyzed. And once it's analyzed, the verdict will be rendered and the firewall will start protecting us if this is a malicious content. Well, that is it, folks. There's way more that we can do with the next generation firewall, but that's where we'll end today, because today was all about how to defend your network using a next generation firewall in a zero trust network architecture. And today we covered why it is important for you to uniquely identify your users, identify your applications, and be content aware, user aware, app aware, or application aware, and content awareness, and leverage these in your next generation firewall to move your security operations towards a zero trust network architecture. And as we go into the final segment, which is called the Cyber Job Alert, as you have seen, if you want to break through in this field, and if you want to be a solid engineer, whether you are entering the field or you have been in the field for a while and you want to level up, maybe you're looking to change job or looking for a promotion, you're looking to move towards cybersecurity, and you have heard all kinds of stuff. You have heard misconceptions. People who think that cybersecurity means that you're hacking computers all day, every day. That's not what cybersecurity people do. They defend networks all day, every day. You're not going to get a job out of the bat or very quickly where you are hacking and penetrating networks. more than likely, you're going to have a job where you're going to help defend the network. And most of the cybersecurity professionals, they don't hack, they defend. And so what I'd recommend to you is to learn how to defend and how to defend with next generation firewalls and next generation features. This is the Cyber Job Alert for today. If you have a question for me, you need help with whatever, send me an email at jared@jaredderival.com or check me out on social media, LinkedIn. I'm always there and I will respond to your questions. Folks, I'm excited about what I'm doing here. I like the fact that I'm sharing content. I'm getting better and better at this. And I'm excited to see you again next week. That's going to be Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern on the dot for another episode of The Proof of Concept.